Have you ever paused to consider the financial tools we use every day? Checks, promissory notes, and how they might be understood through a really specific lens, like Islamic finance.
hmm
Today, we're taking a deep dive into an absolutely illuminating source, Sharia Standard Number 16, which focuses entirely on commercial papers.
A really foundational one.
Exactly. And this standard comes to us from the Fuqaha Office for Training and Consulting, operating under the renowned AAO-IIFI framework.
Right, the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions. They're essentially the global standard setter for Islamic finance.
So our mission today is basically to cut through the complexity of the standard, it's quite detailed, and pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge.
Yeah, distill it down.
Give you a shortcut, really, to being well-informed about how these vital financial instruments are regulated in Islamic finance.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is the meticulous way this standard applies core Sharia principles to these, well, pretty common financial instruments.
Right.
It ensures compliance, ethical practices. It really shows a deep commitment to aligning modern commerce with those foundational Islamic legal frameworks.
Yeah.
It's quite a masterclass in detail, actually.
Okay, so to kick things off then, let's lay the groundwork. What exactly do we mean by commercial papers in the context of this standard?
Good question, because precision is definitely key here. This standard specifically addresses three primary types, and these are largely recognized by the Unified Geneva Convention.
Ah, the international framework.
Exactly. So first, we have the Bill of Exchange, or al-Kambiala. Think of it like a three-party instruction. I tell you to pay him a specific amount on a certain date.
Okay.
It's a written, signed, unconditional order, mandating payment upon demand, or maybe at a specific future date to a designated person or whoever holds the paper, the bearer.
Got it.
Then next up is the promissory note, as sanadli arfar. This was a bit simpler.
Right.
It's a document where the issuer, so the debtor, directly promises to pay a specific amount to someone else, either right away, on site, or at a specific future date.
Okay, straightforward.
And from a Sharia perspective, this is classified precisely as a document of debt, or wathiqa baidain. Very clear label there.
Makes sense.
And finally, the one we probably all handle most often, the common check, as sheikh.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a document with an order from one person to another, usually your bank, to pay a specific amount to a third person immediately upon sight.
Right.
Now, this one has a couple of really fascinating Sharia classifications. It's called a restricted transfer, hawala muqayyada, if you, the drawer, actually have funds in your account with the bank.
Okay.
But it's an absolute transfer, hawala mutlaqa, if you don't have a balance with the drawee. So the bank would essentially be advancing the funds.
Ah, interesting distinction.
It really is. And this isn't just about labels.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to how Islamic law views the transfer of obligation and, importantly, risk.
Yeah.
This distinction really highlights the meticulous precision in defining who owes what and when. It's not just a technicality.
That's a crucial clarification. And it's also important for you listening to know that this standard doesn't cover other types of commercial papers, ones that don't quite fit these specific characteristics.
Right. The scope is very defined.
So we're talking about these three main types here.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. We know what these commercial papers are. Now, the real exploration begins, moving from definition to, well, application.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest question for anyone in Islamic finance is always, can we actually deal with these instruments? This section, I think, really gets to the heart of permissibility and the crucial boundaries set by Sharia Standard 16.
Absolutely. And generally speaking, dealing with all three types of commercial papers is permissible.
Okay.
Provided, and this is the big caveat, it does not lead to any Sharia violation.
Right. Always that condition.
Always. However, this general rule comes with some really critical exceptions and specific conditions. For instance, it is not permissible to deal with bills of exchange and promissory notes in situations where possession, or qob, is required for the transaction's validity. We'll unpack qob more later, but it's a key concept.
Okay, noted. Possession is key.
But dealing with checks, well, that's permissible in quite a few specific scenarios. For instance, a check drawn by a client on a bank where the client has a balance. That's fine.
Standard stuff.
Pretty standard. Similarly, checks drawn between banks or, by a bank on itself or its branches, those are also permissible.
Okay.
Now, what's particularly interesting is the permissibility of a check without a balance, if it's drawn by a client on a bank or by one bank on another.
Wait, how does that work if there's no balance?
Well, this type is uniquely classified in Sharia as a loan, or card Shari'ah.
Ah, a loan. Okay.
Yes. The crucial condition for its permissibility, though, is that drawing it must not lead to riba.
Right, the prohibition on interest or usury.
Exactly. And for listeners, it's really important to remember that riba is absolutely fundamental in Islamic finance. It's not just simple interest, but any unearned predetermined gain on a loan. The whole point is ensuring fairness and preventing exploitation.
That's a fascinating reclassification, calling it a loan. So, if a bank is effectively extending a loan by honoring a check without a balance, what does that mean for how the bank recoups its money? Can they charge a fee for that loan, or how do they manage that risk without riba?
That's a great follow-up question. Because it's classified as a loan, card, charging a fee that's directly tied to the amount or the duration of that loan would absolutely fall under riba.
So no direct interest.
No direct interest allowed. The bank's compensation for processing such a check or for the service would typically come from other things, maybe general account maintenance fees, other related services, but not from the act of advancing that specific loan itself.
Okay.
The risk management part. Well, it comes down to the bank's assessment of the client's creditworthiness, just like with any other potential loan or credit line.
Got it. So it's about the overall relationship and services, not charging for the specific advance.
Precisely. The standard also clarifies things like cross-checks, ash-sheikh al-musatar, and account pay checks, ash-sheikh al-muqayyad bi al-asab. For these, the drawal bank is obligated to honor them according to their specific conditions.
Makes sense.
And one more traveler's checks. The standard says the issuing entity is permitted to charge a commission for the service of issuing and guaranteeing them.
Okay, that covers a lot on permissibility. So we've talked about what these papers are and whether we can use them. But for these papers to be really useful in commerce, they need to move through the system, right? Change hands.
Exactly. They need fluidity. So let's explore how ownership and rights are transferred. Let's start with endorsement.
Right. Endorsement is crucial. It's precisely how these instruments gain that fluidity you mentioned. It's the legal mechanism where a person basically signs over their rights to the paper,
Passing its value and the obligations that come with it to someone else. The standard clarifies that all types of endorsement are considered legally binding, provided they meet the stipulated conditions and include the necessary data.
So if you sign it over properly,
Then the new holder genuinely acquires the rights and can pursue payment. It's a valid transfer.
okay. And what about the collection process? Say, I'm now the rightful holder. How do I get the money?
Well, the act of collecting commercial papers, from the Shari'ah perspective, is viewed as a type of power of attorney.
Okay.
The beneficiary essentially gives the financial institution, like a bank, the authority to collect the paper's value on their behalf.
Like an agent.
Exactly, acting as an agent.
Yeah.
And the institution is entitled to an agreed-upon fee for this service. If there's no explicit agreement on the fee beforehand,
Yeah.
then the prevailing custom, the IRF, in that particular market is applied. What standard practice becomes the rule?
Right. Custom plays a big role sometimes. Okay. Now, this next point is really crucial. And it's often where Islamic finance takes a sharp turn from conventional practices. The idea of discounting commercial papers.
Yes. Hasm?
This is often a significant source of confusion for many people, I think.
You're absolutely right. And the standard is very clear here. Direct discounting of commercial papers, Hazm al-Araq al-Tijariyah, is not permissible.
Not allowed. Full stop.
Full stop. And similarly, selling a deferred commercial paper, one that's payable in the future for the same amount or even more than its original value, is also not allowed.
Okay.
This prohibition on direct discounting, Hazm, it's really a cornerstone of Islamic finance. It stems directly from the prohibition of riba.
Because you're essentially paying less now for more later.
Precisely.
Yeah.
When you discount a future payment for an immediate smaller sum of cash, Sharia views this as exchanging money now for a larger amount of the same money in the future. That's the very essence of riba. The deep insight here, I think, is how Islamic finance prioritizes fairness and equity. It prevents people making gains simply from the time value of money itself without some underlying productive asset or service involved.
That distinction, though, between prohibited discounting and something that looks similar, like an early settlement discount, that can be quite subtle for people coming from a purely conventional finance background. How would you explain the core Sharia logic separating them?
Yeah, it's a really good point because they can seem similar on the surface. It really boils down to the nature of the transaction.
Okay.
In prohibited discounting, you're essentially selling a debt for less than its face value. You're trading that future debt obligation for immediate cash, and that difference, that discount, is seen as riba earned on the money changing hands.
Right. Money for money, with a time difference creating the gain.
Exactly. Whereas an early settlement discount isn't a new sale or a trade of debt like that. It's a reduction in the original debt amount, offered voluntarily by the creditor as an incentive for early payment.
So the creditor is just choosing to accept less.
Yes, the creditor is forgiving a portion of the debt they are owed in exchange for getting the payment sooner. They aren't buying the debt at a discount, they're reducing the existing debt. It's about the creditor's choice to incentivize speed, not about making money purely on the time value of money. It's a key distinction, really rooted in avoiding riba.
That's incredibly helpful. Okay, so if direct discounting isn't allowed, that raises a big question. Are there any Sharia-compliant ways to achieve a similar financial outcome? Like if you need to liquidate a paper early?
Absolutely. The standard doesn't just prohibit, it also points towards permissible alternatives.
Good. Like what?
Well, for instance, it is permissible to receive less than the paper's face value from the first beneficiary before its due date.
Ah, so that's the early settlement discount we just discussed.
Exactly. The original creditor voluntarily agrees to take less for prompt payment. That's fine.
Okay, what else?
Another permissible scenario is when the bearer of a commercial paper, say, uses it to purchase a commodity on credit. Once the debt for that commodity is established between the buyer and seller, the buyer, who holds the commercial paper, can then assign the paper they hold, representing a debt owed to them to their own creditor, the seller of the commodity.
So passing the debt along.
Precisely. This is distinctly classified as hawala.
Right, the transfer of debt or assignment.
Yes. It's about moving an existing debt obligation from one party to another, not creating new riba through discounting the paper itself.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a transfer, not a sale at discount.
Correct. And there's one more. It is also permissible to use a deferred commercial paper as payment for a specific commodity or a benefit, like a service.
Okay.
But there's a crucial condition here. This is only allowed if there is actual or constructive possession of that commodity or benefit.
Ah, possession again. So you can't use a future promise of money to buy something that isn't really there yet or isn't truly yours to sell.
Exactly. It needs to be a real exchange for something tangible or a defined service benefit that exists.
We touched on this concept of possession, cabbed, earlier, and you said it was fundamental. Let's really dig into what that means now, especially for things like checks and bank transfers, because it seems to dictate whether certain dealings are even allowed.
It really does. CABD is about control and certainty. So let's look at checks first. For immediately payable checks, receiving one is considered constructive possession.
Constructive possession, meaning like as good as having the cash?
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
It's considered constructive possession if it's a bank check or a certified check, basically. One where the funds are guaranteed or already set aside in the drawer's account, or something very similar.
Okay, so if the money's basically guaranteed.
Right. In those cases, dealing with them is permissible, where possession is normally required because the transfer of value is highly certain.
But
However, receiving an immediately payable check is not considered constructive possession if it's not one of those guaranteed types like a standard personal check where you don't know for sure if the funds are there.
right, could bounce.
Exactly. In such cases, it becomes impermissible to deal with that check if possession is a requirement for that specific transaction, because the actual transfer of value isn't certain or guaranteed yet.
So for you as a learner listening to this, what's the practical implication? Why does it matter so much whether possession is considered constructive or not in these financial transactions?
Well, the practical implication is really about the validity and the transferability under Sharia rules.
Okay.
If a particular transaction, according to Islamic law, requires physical or constructive possession for it to be compliant, maybe something like a currency exchange or certain types of sales or debt transfers, and that condition of possession isn't met, well, then the transaction itself might be considered invalid or at least flawed from a Sharia perspective.
Ah, so it could void the deal.
Potentially, yes, or raise serious questions about its compliance. This focus on possession is vital because it ensures that the exchange is real, not just theoretical or overly speculative. It confirms ownership, ensures the transfer of risk happens properly, and ultimately reduces ambiguity and the potential for disputes later on. It's about certainty and clarity.
Makes sense. Okay, what about bank transfers then? How does possession work there?
With bank transfers, it's generally permissible if the amount being transferred is in the same currency as the payment received.
Okay, like transferring dollars for dollars received.
Exactly. But if the currencies are different, say you pay in euros to transfer dollars, Then a currency exchange operation, a SARF, must be conducted first.
Meaning you have to lock in the exchange rate.
Yes, the exchange rate is fixed, and the exchange happens conceptually, right then and there. After that conceptual exchange, constructive possession is considered sufficient, and the transfer can proceed.
Interesting.
What's really fascinating here is how Sharia precisely categorizes this situation. It's seen as a combination of currency exchange, SARF, and a transfer of debt, hawala.
Wow.
It really shows how these fundamental classical concepts are intricately woven into understanding modern financial mechanisms.
That's quite elegant, actually. Okay, finally, let's talk about what underpins all of this. The trust factor, the acceptance of payment, and the guarantees that ensure it actually happens.
Right, the bedrock of making these papers work. Acceptance of payment for commercial paper is considered a binding undertaking.
Meaning you have to pay.
You absolutely have to pay the debt represented by that paper to its bearer on the due date. The standard explicitly says this payment is Sharia obligatory.
Not just legally, but religiously binding.
Correct. It's not just a commercial law thing. It's an obligation under Islamic law. And crucially, all the signatories on the paper, the drawer, the endorser, any guarantor who added their name, they are jointly obligated to the bearer for its value.
Jointly obligated. Meaning?
Meaning, according to the conditions of joint liability. If the main person who is supposed to pay, the drawee, refuses to pay up, the bearer can then pursue any or all of the other signatories, individually or collectively, to get the value of the paper. It spreads the responsibility and increases the security for the holder.
That provides a lot more security for the holder, knowing they can go after others if needed.
Exactly. And speaking of security,
What about additional security, like collateral?
good question. Any real guarantees like actual collateral, maybe property or assets that are stipulated by the paper's bearer to ensure their right to payment, well, those are subject to the specific Sharia rulings on pledge, or RAN.
Okay, so the rules of collateral apply.
Precisely. This provides an extra layer of security, but it also ensures that the established Islamic principles of how pledging assets works are properly upheld. It adds another layer of trust and enforceability, all within the Sharia framework.
We have certainly unpacked a truly detailed and illuminating standard on commercial papers today.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. We explored their precise definitions, the rules around permissibility, how they're transferred and collected, and those really nuanced aspects of discounting and possession within Islamic finance. It's incredible how such a comprehensive framework addresses these modern financial tools with such precision and, frankly, ethical grounding.
It's quite remarkable. And if we try to connect this to the bigger picture, maybe step back a bit, these Sharia standards for commercial papers, they really emphasize principles like, clear obligations, avoiding unnecessary or speculative risk, qarar, and maintaining ethical conduct throughout.
Foundational principles.
Absolutely. So it makes you think, how might such detailed ethical and legal frameworks, like the ones we see in Islamic finance for even something as common as a check, how might they offer valuable lessons for the broader global financial system, especially in fostering trust and stability, which we know can be fragile?
That is definitely something to think about, right? A different perspective on ensuring financial integrity. Well, until our next deep dive, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep being curious.